Welcome back to the Puddin' Creek Rod Shop. This past week we made some more progress on the Ojai Coupe's frame. That's the frame for the 1932 Ford Coupe we're building. Now it's not going to be long. We're going to have to make some serious decisions on how we're going to lower the rear end of this car. Are we going for a gentleman's lowering job, where we only reverse the rear spring eyes and maybe take out a few leaves to lower it a little bit? Or are we going to get more serious and flatten the original 32 Ford rear cross member? Or are we going for door number 3? The third choice is to replace the rear cross member with a Model A cross member. Now that will really drop the rear end. Now here's what the Ojai Coupe looked like before we tore it apart to do the frame repairs. As you can see, it sits pretty high in the back. So in today's video, we're back to work on the 32 Ford frame. Later in the video, we're going to gas the chicken's legs. And you're saying Puddin' Creek, that must be some kind of 1960s drag racing term. I wish it was, but sadly it's just a mess the little woman drug me into. You guys are not going to believe this one until you see it. Now I need to cut a few more pieces out of 1/8 inch flat stock to finish the frame repairs on the 32 Ford Coupe. If you guys have been watching my videos, you know I don't have a vertical bandsaw. I've been using the porta-band kind of turned up vertically and strapped to a post for a vertical bandsaw, but that's getting old. So since we have General Chow's saw repaired and running good now, let's take just a few minutes and do the world's fastest vertical bandsaw table attachment. I looked around in my junk pile and found this round piece of steel that's already powder-coated gray. I'm pretty sure this came off of an industrial machine years ago. I'm using the Starrett blade and center head to scribe a line that's perfectly in the center of the diameter. Next, I'm going to saw that line that I just scribed, but only a little past halfway. Now I need to remove this little saw guide and transfer the hole locations to the new vertical saw table. Because every hole that's drilled in the shop starts out with a center drill, I just keep a number 3 center drill in the little Hamilton high-speed drill press at all times. That way, every time I get ready to drill a hole, I just walk right over to the Hamilton, center drill it real quick, and then move right next door to the old 1960s Craftsman drill press and drill the actual hole size. I bought this Craftsman drill press from a young man, probably 25 years old. His grandpa had died, and he'd inherited his grandpa's workshop with all the tools in it. He'd put the drill press on Marketplace for sale, and that's the ad I had responded to, and I had came to buy just the one thing. But when I got there, he told me he wanted to sell all the tools in the workshop. He said he wanted rid of all these old tools because he wanted to go buy all brand new tools from Lowe's. So I was trying to be an honest person, and I told the young man, I said, these are really nice tools. They're in terrific shape. They're all made in USA. I said, these tools that your grandpa left you are going to be a lot better quality than anything you can buy at Lowe's. He told me he didn't care. He wanted all brand new tools. He did not want old tools. So I bought a half of a pickup truckload of his grandpa's tools from him. I really felt bad about it, but I tried to tell him. I did pay him a fair price for everything I bought. I didn't lowball him on anything. All right, it's time to quit messing around. Let's get the last of these patches sawed out and get them welded into 32 Ford frame. These Harbor Freight magnetic work lights are the handiest, most aggravating thing I've ever used. I mean, you can stick them right where you want them, and then you can adjust the light to light up your work spot just perfectly. But as soon as you flip your welding helmet down, or you drag a drop cord, or you move your elbow, or you scratch your ear, you'll knock them off in the floor every single time. Now, my goal is to have the body back on the frame this summer and to be showing you guys videos of me and the little woman cruising the Ojai Coupe. But for right now, we got to finish welding up all these frame patches, and then we got to fit the new K-member in. So let's get busy. Now, not only did this frame need some patches, but it also had some extra holes drilled in it over the years for who knows what. So I'm going to have to plug weld those holes up. I know most of you guys know exactly how to plug weld holes in a frame, but maybe for some of the guys that's new to the hobby, I'll explain how I do it. Now, I've got a heavy piece of copper plate that I got out of an old industrial machine years ago, and I use a little bit of this nozzle dip. You can use the spray can anti-spatter, works just as good, but I put a little of that on the copper plate just to help the weld not to stick to it. Clamp the copper plate right below the hole you're going to plug weld, obviously. Now, to weld up the hole, don't start in the center. Start at the outer diameter of the hole and weld a ring all the way around the outer diameter, and then step in and weld a ring around that, and so forth. Basically, you're going to weld a spiral pattern until you get to the center of the hole, and it all happens pretty fast. Back in the 50s or 60s, whoever took a cutting torch to the original K-member in this car and just ruined it, well, they also torched on this transmission mount too. So I'm going to replace it with a brand new one. This car has the 39 Ford trans in it, so it's got the trans we want, and we're putting a mint K-member back in it, so let's take care of this transmission mount before we do. Now you can see there in the plastic, I have a brand new transmission mount, but it doesn't come with this center steel part. We need this center hub out. This is an original Henry Ford part that's going to be reused, and man, it sure is stuck in this old rubber. This 86-year-old rubber has kind of changed and petrified and kind of turned into something you might have dug up at the La Brea tar pits. Now what I'm using to pry this out of the rubber, these are called carpenter's flat bars. You guys use them, you know what I'm talking about. But you don't normally see them used in automotive work, although there was one occurrence that I saw them used in a hot rod build. Let me tell you about that. You see, I traveled to another state to buy an old Ford Coupe off of an older gentleman, really nice guy. And while I was there, I noticed he had some old vintage signs tacked up on the inside of his corn crib. Yep, the signs that you saw on the intro of this video. Well, I asked him about buying the signs, and sure enough, we struck a deal on them. But when I went to take them down, they were nailed to the walls instead of screwed. So I asked him, you wouldn't happen to have a carpenter's flat pry bar that I could use to wiggle these nails out without tearing up the signs, would you? Well, when I asked him that, he just made an awful face, and he said, I used to have one of those flat pry bars, but I don't anymore. Long story short, I got the signs off the wall. We bought the signs, we bought the coupe, we loaded it all up and headed back to Puddin Creek Rod Shop. Now, if you notice, that passenger side headlight is kind of slumped and laid over like an old cowboy that's just been shot. So when I get it back to the shop, I put it up on the lift so I can look up under the fender and see what's wrong with the fender brace or the headlight mount. I stick my head up under the fender, and what do you know? I find the guy's missing pry bar. I mean, this Henry Ford petrified rubber is stuck. This must have been some of the rubber from the Amazon rainforest. Did you guys know that in the 1920s, Henry Ford had his own rubber plantation located in Brazil? And he had his own communities of people there that worked the rubber plantation and produced all the rubber for the cars? I know at least one of you guys is sitting on the couch with your wife right now, and you just elbowed her in the ribs and said, "Looky there, old Puddin' Creek dropping knowledge on us." Who knew? Man, this Henry Ford Brazilian rubber is stuck like chewing gum on the bottom of your shoe. Let's heat it up and see if that takes it off. Who would have thought trying to get the rubber off this thing was going to take this much work? This is crazy. All right, I got the rubber all cleaned up, but this machine surface looks like it's kind of beat up. Let's take a flat file, we'll take a mill file, and let's flat file across this machine surface and see how bad it is. Evidently, whoever installed this 39 transmission back in the day used a ball-peen hammer to install it. Scratch that. I think they used a sledgehammer. Scratch that. I think they used a D10 bulldozer. This machine surface should be perfectly flat, and it's just beat all to pieces. This thing was so beat up, I had to go ahead and put it in the vise so I could get both hands on the file and really get busy and do some serious filing to flatten this thing back out. When you're doing this, you always want to file from different directions because your file always takes a little bit more meat off the leading edge than it does the following edge, even though you're holding it perfectly flat. So go ahead and file from one direction, then switch to another direction, then switch to another direction. It'll come out a lot flatter that way. And remember, a mill file only cuts on the forward stroke, not the return stroke. So you push down on the forward stroke and lift up on the return stroke, and that way you don't dull your teeth. So I wiped it all down real good and shot a coat of black paint on it. Now before this black paint dries, let's wipe off that machine surface that we just filed flat. I'm just using a little bit of lacquer thinner to wipe it off. While I was painting this, a little woman texted me and asked me to come over and help her with a project. So while this paint's drying, let's go over and see what the little woman's got going on. Now, friends and neighbors, Puddin' Creek Rod Shop subscribers, and the whole Hee-Haw gang, I want to let you know that this is a first for me. What you think you're seeing is actually what you're seeing. We are dipping these chickens' legs in gasoline. The little woman says these chickens have leg mites, and the leg mites are causing scaly leg disease. I know, this is more information than you wanted. She says she's tried every kind of medicine available, nothing works. And evidently she got on the Google machine and some veterinarian/witch doctor has told her to dip them in gasoline and then coat them with Vaseline. So for all my hot rod buddies watching, if you come over to visit, don't be smoking near the chicken house. Now back when I was drilling out Henry Ford's rivets to remove the old trashed K-member, there's 18 rivets in it and I got all 18 of them drilled out perfectly except for one. And on one of the rivets, my drill must have let off a little bit, and it messed up the hole in the frame. Now that'll never do. We're going to have to fix that. It would be no problem at all to plug weld it, just like I showed you before. The problem is it would have to be re-drilled from inside the frame rail in order to get the proper location. And that's a tight place to try to get a drill into and drill. So I've got another solution. A copper welding tip is the exact same size as the finished hole we need to end up with in the frame. So let's put a nut on it and then let's coat it in nozzle dip. And we'll use this to fix the hole in the frame. So now I've got the copper welding tip located in the exact position that the original rivet would have been. The part that's got the red magic marker mark on it, that's the part that has to be welded up. Now this method doesn't leave a perfect hole, but we don't need a perfect hole. We're going to swage a 1/4 inch rivet in this anyway, and when that rivet gets heated and the head swaged down on it, it's going to fill up all the irregularities around the edges of that hole. I just take a steel punch and knock the copper piece out of the center and we're good to go. All right, we hit a good milestone. That's the end of all the frame repairs. If we do any more serious work to the frame, there'll be modifications, not repairs, but that fixes all the old problems. So now I'm going to take all these covers off that have been protecting the engine from grinding dust, take the cover off the transmission, and we're getting ready to put the new transmission mount in. I ordered the transmission mount from 3rd Gen Automotive. They're my go-to, they're my first choice. They hardly ever mess an order up. I really like dealing with these guys. These are the original Henry Ford bolts for the torque tube. I did a lot of cleaning on them. I ground down all the burrs on the heads, and then I cleaned the threads really good and checked them with good nuts to make sure the threads are all perfect. And right now I'm just putting them in place and sticking some nuts on them temporarily just to keep them from falling out of this plate until I get it assembled into the rubber piece. Now, as hard as it was to get out of the old rubber collar, I'm assuming it's going to be pretty tight going back in. So let's hit it with some grease for a little lube before we attempt to assemble these two parts together. Wow, that was too easy. Now that's the way I like to see things go together. You can't beat 3rd Gen Automotive. They have good parts. Well, here we go. We got the 32 transmission mount getting mounted back on the 39 transmission. I really like this part of a build when things are going together instead of coming apart. All right, this is big. For years, I've been saving this mint condition 32 Ford K member that all the holes are perfect in. It's perfectly straight. It's even still got Henry Ford's black paint still on it. I've been saving it for a build that was worthy of one this nice, and this is the build, the Ojai Coupe. When we took the old K-member out, the spring rails, they sprung a little bit. That's no big deal. We're just going to take a strap here and just gently pull them right back together. They just need to go a little bit to get all the rivet holes to line up. Now, as you can see, we're not putting the rivets in yet. First of all, we want to get everything to fit perfectly just using the appropriate size bolts. And we'll get it all bolted together and fitted and locked down tight. And then later on, we'll slowly take one bolt out at a time and replace it with a hot rivet. Now, it's been a while since we took the old K-member out, so I went out in the junkyard and just filmed a little clip of it for you guys just to remind you how bad this thing actually was. I mean, this thing looked like Frankenstein's sister. This is the reason we went to all this work to put a new K-member in this car. Well, guys, here's where we're at. I got all 18 bolts in the K-member. Everything fits perfect. We've got all the bolts tightened down. The next step is going to be to hand make all the tooling to hot rivet the K-member in. We'll be making the bucking blocks from scratch. We'll be making tooling for the air hammer to swage the heads on the rivets after we heat them up and get them in. It's going to be a cool future video coming for you guys. Once we get the K-member all hot riveted in, just like Henry Ford did it, that'll be it for the K-member. Now, I've already got the front suspension planned out for this car. We'll pull the front spring out and reverse the spring eyes, taper the leaves, take a few leaves out, do our standard thing on the front end. And then for the front axle, I've been saving this original Henry Ford 32 heavy axle that's already been heated and dropped. Man, it's a nice one, but this one will go right up under it, and that's going to get our front end right down where we want to be. Now, the rear end is still undecided. That's a whole different story. I have this really nice 40 Ford rear end that I've been saving for a project, but obviously to put this in the car, I would have to shorten the drive shaft, shorten the torque tube, shorten the rear bones. So it'd be quite a bit of work to get this one in the car, but it'd be a cool rear end to have. On the other hand, I have the original 32 Ford rear end that came out of the car. Now, this rear end had already been changed over to 40 Ford juice brakes, and the brakes have been rebuilt and everything. I mean, it was working perfect when I took it out, and obviously this would bolt right back in and would need no modifications. Now, as we close out the show today, I'm going to leave you with one piece of advice. Think twice before you take the body off your hot rod. You might not like what you find underneath. And in the hobby of hot rodding, one thing always leads to another. So when you take the body off your hot rod, it might be a whole year before it ever goes back on. That's our show for this week. As always, we appreciate you guys watching our channel. Tune in next Monday to see how far along we've got on the Ojai Coupe, or if we've answered the wrong marketplace ad, which has led us to buy some other rusty hunk of junk and drag another project home that's going to derail us and keep us from ever getting this car back together. If you enjoyed the show, leave me a comment and let me know. Sling a like at us if you get a chance. And don't forget to subscribe if you hadn't already.